the work that you did in that one audition where you didn't advance, you still put in all that work, and those excerpts are going to come back in the next audition, and you're going to be more confident playing those excerpts in the next audition.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I'm so glad you're here as we continue our series this week on auditioning. You can find all the episodes about auditioning, and we've done a lot, at contrabassconversations.com/auditioning. Now, today, we are talking with Tim Dilenschneider, who is the recent winner of the Baltimore Symphony double bass audition. He's also a former student of Hal Robinson and Edgar Meyer at Curtis, and he studied before that in high school with Ranaan Meyer. Now, we talk about all kinds of things. This was such a fun chat, like how everything outside of the audition can seem to go wrong and you can still end up winning the audition, how preparation for one audition carries through to the next one, how figuring out the difference between private practice and performing practice is so crucial, and many other topics. His audition preparation process was just such a fun chat. Tim's a great guy. I had such a great time talking with him. Before we get going here, I'd love to thank our sponsor, D'Addario Strings, and let you know about our giveaway with D'Addario for 10 sets of Kaplan strings. And that's contrabassconversations.com/strings to enter that giveaway. Kaplan's are superb strings for bowing. They've got great bow response. They're beautifully balanced. They've got a rich tonal color palette. I have them on my bass right now. They're great for lyrical playing. They're great for off the string playing. They've got a great pizzicato sound, and they are used by bassists like Andres Martin, Anthony Stoops, Brett Simner, Klaus Freudenstein, Craig Butterfield, Daniel Kimbrough, David Allen Moore, Gabriele Raggiante, Mark Morton, so many names, so many others, Kurt Muroki, just wonderful strings. I'm having a blast with them, and I'd love it if you entered our giveaway. I'd also like to thank the Violin Shop, which offers the Southeast's largest inventory of basses. Those are laminate basses, hybrid basses, carved double basses. Whatever you're looking for in the bass world, there's always a unique selection ready for you to try. And trade-ins and consignments are welcome. They also offer a variety of rental options for seasoned musicians or first-timers. It's such a crucial thing in this day and age with air travel being so challenging for bass players. So with long and short-term rental programs designed to fit each player's particular needs, touring with your group in the Carolinas maybe, attending a festival, attending a workshop, if you need a bass, call the Violin Shop or go to their website for a short-term rental. And that is bassviolinshop.com. And thank you to Rosin Saver for being a sponsor as well. And I have been loving my Rosin Saver. I can't believe how great my Pops looks after months and months and months. It looks just as fresh as the day I got it. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. Members of the New York Philharmonic, Toronto Symphony, LA Phil, Cleveland Orchestra, Seattle Symphony, they're all also using Rosin Saver. And if you go to rosinsaver.com and use the promo code HEATH, H-E-A-T-H, at checkout, you'll get 10% off any and all orders. Again, promo code HEATH and rosinsaver.com. All right, here we go with our conversation featuring Tim Dilenschneider. Maybe we just talk about the nuts and bolts of like the Baltimore audition, like when it happened, prelims, semis, finals, just how that structure looked like.
For sure. I feel like now I need to look up the exact date, but it was, I think it was sometime in October. And cool. The prelims, semis, and finals were thankfully all in 1 week. And this was actually one of the first auditions that I took where it was all in 1 week like that. Mm-hmm. It was spread out over the week, so it was multiple days, maybe 4 days, 5 days. So I had to book a hotel for 5 days and stay there the entire time. But previous auditions that I had taken, I would come out and when I advanced, they were always like, okay, congratulations on advancing and come back and we'll see you in 3 months. And I'm just like, oh, what? I didn't really know what to do. So it was nice kind of going into it thinking like it'll be this week, it'll be a busy week, but then it'll be done. Mm-hmm. And for me, let's see, well, I went up there and sort of it was a weird audition for me just because everything seemed to go wrong outside of the audition. When I first landed in Baltimore, I had my suitcase for 5 days. I had my stool. I had my giant flight case. And I was trying to get a ride, and I couldn't get a ride. And I called an Uber, and this Uber driver pulled up and just said, "No way, are you putting that in my car?" And he drove off. And that was one of the first times that it happened to me. I didn't really know what to do, so I called another Uber, and then this guy picked me up, and he was very friendly, very nice, and we were chatting the entire way to the hotel. And actually, I guess to backtrack a little bit, there was no hotels in Baltimore at all. There was some big festival going on in Baltimore, so I couldn't stay in the city, and I always try and walk to the hall because I don't want to deal with getting an Uber or a taxi the day of. I stay right next to the hall. It usually costs a little more, but for me and my peace of mind, it's worth it. This was the first audition where I couldn't do that. So I was staying out in Catonsville, which is a 25-minute drive west outside of the city. And it was kind of the only hotel around. And so I was having this Uber driver drive me from the airport to Catonsville. And super friendly. And by the end of it, we had a great conversation. By the end of it, I was like, "Hey, let me just get your number. Like, would it be possible for me to just call you tomorrow? I have an audition. Would you be able to pick me up?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course. Just here, take down my number, confirm with me tonight, confirm with me tomorrow. I'll come and pick you up." Texted him late that night and said, "Hey, just confirming, 9 a.m. pickup tomorrow." And he said, "No problem. I'll be there. See you then." Walked down at 8:45, texted him just to check. No show. Didn't show up. Yeah. He ditched me completely. And so I stood there from 9 a.m. until about 9:30 at 25 minutes outside of the city with this big bass and my stool and stuff, just kind of freaking out. And my prelim round was sometime in the morning, and I was just refreshing Uber. There was no Ubers around. I had never found been in a situation like that before. I usually don't like taxis because taxis have a history of standing me up and not taking the bass, or the seats won't go down. So I ended up downloading Lyft, and thankfully I got somebody off of Lyft just like driving on the highway going to DC, and he swung around and picked me up and was just like, "Yeah, I'll take you in." And so that first day I was just kind of like full of panic, and by the time I got there I was just so like, I just want to play. I don't care how it goes. Like I'm just happy that I made it,
Man, it's so great. It's so great to hear that, because like I think people have this image of like everybody's like all zenned out in the audition, and they're like drinking their herbal tea, and they walk in and everything's like perfect. The people who advance, and so you get there for that prelim. I'm just fast. Like talk about that sounds like the worst morning ever. Like you're downloading Lyft.
It was bad. I was panicking downloading Lyft, and I actually asked him to drop me off at Starbucks because I'm under the a lot of people like to do the herbal tea and the Zen, and they do meditation, and I'm just kind of, I just want to do my regular routine. I wake up and I have coffee, and I know some people cut out coffee. They'll cut out, video games. They'll wake up early every day when they're preparing for an audition. And for me, it was just, I want to do exactly the same. I don't want to change anything with my routine. So I rolled up to Starbucks. I got dropped off at Starbucks. I got a large coffee and then kind of wheeled my bass over from there. And I went down. I was drinking coffee in my warm-up room, and I went into my warm-up room and I kind of played it a little bit. It was a really tiny room, and I just was like, you know what? And I put down my bass and I kind of stood outside my warm-up room and didn't really warm up that day. I just felt like I'm ready to play. I'm ready to go. And I was sitting out there drinking coffee, and this guy next to me, I remember, kind of looked at me and was like, "Oh man, you're drinking coffee before you go on stage?" He's like, "You're gonna be all shaky." But no, it was just something to calm me down. Like, having my morning cup of coffee. It was just, I guess maybe it's its own form of meditation for me, just having that routine. But I went in and I played and I advanced. Thankfully, I felt pretty good about my round, but at the same time, it was sort of kind of just blew by. Baltimore didn't have a huge list. It was very specific excerpts, and I appreciated that. And it was a very kind of concise prelim round, and went in there, played. And then the horror story continued the second day, where I decided, I'm just going to call a taxi cab. Actually, I think I had a day off and then the semis, because there was 2 days of semis. So I decided to call a taxi cab and say, can you pick me up at this time? And they said, sure, no problem. And I said, it has to be a van. The seats have to go down. They said, no worries at all. And I didn't trust them. So I called a second taxi cab company as well and booked it with 2 different taxi cab companies for my semis. And on the day of my semis, neither one of the taxi cab companies showed up. So I was stood up again.
Man.
Then I instantly forget Uber. I went right to Lyft that time and got this guy who picked me up and was very, very nice and very helpful. And he kind of rolled up and I was like, "You're saving me right now. You don't understand. I have a job interview that I'm late for and I need to go to, and people are standing me up left and right." And this guy was from Baltimore, and he was incredibly friendly and was like the first person I really got to like sit down and talk to about the city. And he were actually still in contact. He added me on Facebook and was texting me throughout the rounds being like, hey man, like let me know if you advance. I think his daughter played violin, and I promised him comp tickets, and I'm going to get him comp tickets because he actually ended up driving me for the finals in the morning the next day, or I guess 2 days later as well. So I stayed in touch with this guy, and he was very friendly and very nice. But I was just kind of sick of being stood up at that point.
Oh man, this podcast is brought to you by Lyft.
Yeah, I know.
Wonderful people
Lyft,
at Lyft.
please give me free rides.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So this guy saved me. So I was very appreciative of him. And I mean, I rolled up for my semi round, and I tried to do everything the same as the prelim round. I went in there, and I didn't warm up too much. I kind of just got my music in order, and then from there just went out and played, and kind of crossed my fingers a little bit. It wasn't I don't know, Baltimore sort of came out of nowhere for me. I didn't even think about taking Baltimore. I was on tour with the NYSC New York Symphonic Ensemble, and I was over in Japan when I applied for Baltimore. And when I was over there, I was just kind of actually, I was roommates with a bassoon player who was looking through all these classifieds of bassoon auditions, and I was like, "You're applying for auditions every year?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, the deadlines and stuff." And I was sitting there like, maybe I should look and see if there's any bass auditions, and Baltimore was there. So I had to write up my resume by memory and just kind of sent it off because I didn't have my computer. I was doing it off of my phone or off of my iPad, I think. And so it was something that I hadn't been planning on doing, and I got back, and I got back from the Japan tour, and I think I had just not too much time for preparation on this list, but thankfully it wasn't a huge one.
Nice. Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
I mean, that's it'd be fun to hear like just kind of like your audition path up to this point. Like, what you been taking auditions. I'm assuming this probably wasn't your very first audition.
No, it was not. When I was, let's see, my audition path is kind of split in my mind in two different sections. My first section was when I probably shouldn't have really been taking auditions. And that was while I was still in school. That was my last year or two at Curtis. I started taking auditions, and I really just wanted to get out there and see what it was like. Because all my classmates were taking auditions at that time, and I just really wanted to get my feet wet. And so my very first audition was Dallas Symphony. And I was especially excited to be invited to that because I think I sent in a tape round because they saw my resume, and I was just a college student. I sent in a tape, and I got invited to go play there, and I took that audition, didn't advance preliminary round. I took the Nashville audition, and I did not advance preliminary round, and I took the Met audition, and I did not advance preliminary round. And so those three auditions were the ones that I took at Curtis, where I kind of knew that I wasn't ready, but I also just wanted to try it out, wanted to see what it was like. And man, it did not go well. I was skipping lines in Beethoven 5. I remember at the Nashville audition, like I felt so prepared on my own. I really worked hard in the practice room, and I felt like I was doing everything that everyone was kind of telling me to do. But once I stepped on stage to play, I was having memory slips, and when the music's right in front of me, my fingers weren't working right. I couldn't really figure out what the problem was. After those three auditions, those were kind of like the three big auditions that I took, like full-time gigs. I started taking some local orchestras because I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to be next year, what was going on. So I went out to Allentown, and that was my first audition where I actually advanced. And I actually won a position in the Allentown Symphony. And I was on kind of like a tenure track there. I was also I auditioned for the Symphony in C, the Haddonfield Symphony. That's also a local orchestra. So I started playing a little bit with the local orchestras in my last year of Curtis. That's when New World Symphony had their audition up in New York. And so I drove up, and I had just started to have a little bit of success in the local orchestras. Went up and took that audition in New York. And before I found out the results for that, I came back, and Philly Orchestra was having a sub audition. This was back in 2014, and I took that audition as well, and that was kind of like a single round, but a decent list of excerpts, and I was lucky enough to get that, and then a couple weeks later I found out that I got New World, and went down to New World. Okay, and so now my first year at New World, I was like, all right. As soon as I got into New World, I was super excited. And I thought, oh, well, this is going to be a blast. And then as soon as I got down there and saw everyone kind of freaking out about taking auditions, and I realized like now is the time to freak out a little bit and take auditions and not to just kind of sit back and relax. So my first year at New World, I applied for at least 2 or 3 big auditions like Detroit, Seattle, I think, and Atlanta. But the problem was, as a first year, I was not allowed to leave when MTT was conducting. And every single one of those auditions fell on top of an MTT week. So that entire first year that I was down there, I was practicing, I was kind of preparing lists, but then I would always get denied leave. So I couldn't actually take the audition. So that's kind of the year that split my two. So I kind of had my Curtis year, so I didn't advance ever. Then I kind of had a year of practice and preparation and wanting to take auditions, but being unable to take auditions. And then at the start of my second year is when I was sort of allowed more leave to go take auditions. And that's when I first started advancing. It was San Francisco was my first real audition after that 1-year break. And that was San Francisco Associate Principal. And I advanced there, and I had to fly. That was one of the first rounds where, I had to fly back and then come back for the finals. So I came back for the finals a few months later of continuing to prep that, and that one was a no hire. And then I ended up taking Pittsburgh Symphony, and that also when I made finals for that one, I had to come back a few months later. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I know I had to fly back there. Did not get either of those auditions. There was no hire in San Francisco, and Pittsburgh was awarded to a good friend of mine, Joe Campagna, and somebody else. I can't remember his name. And then after that, I went for San Francisco round 2, and I flew back out there again, played the finals there again, and it was another no hire out there. And then I auditioned for this NYSE Japan tour. That was more of a tape round, just a single, prepare some excerpts, send it off. And I got the NYSE thing, and then while I was over there in Japan, I applied for Baltimore and then won Baltimore. So I think my confidence was up going into Baltimore, just having advanced in a lot of auditions. And I guess I sort of figured things out in those 2 years down in New World.
So I think a lot of people listen, they'd be like, Tim, what did you figure out? And I don't, and it's very hard. I know it's like a wide, complex kind of question, but how many people have been there? Like, I felt so prepared in the practice room and I go in and I'm skipping lines in Beethoven, right? Like, I've been there.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, and then definitely, like you're describing, you could definitely see that split, right? So can you pinpoint anything that changed for you either in preparation or mindset or that sort of thing?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that changed for me was figuring out the difference between private practice, which is what I consider to be just in the practice room by yourself, and then also performance practice, which is playing for other people. While I was at Curtis, I was really into private practice, and I really just kind of closed myself off, and I thought of auditions as I get in this practice room and I learn all the excerpts and I learn them really well, and then I just play them, and then I go and I show up that day and I just kind of cross my fingers and hope today's a good day, because everyone says, everyone has their good days and their bad days, and I was just crossing my fingers hoping for a good day. And I knew that I knew the excerpts, but as soon as I stepped out on stage, it was just a completely different excerpt. It was a completely different animal playing on stage for people. And so that was when I first started to realize, hey, there's something more to audition taking than just the private practice. And then that's what I like to call performance practice. And that's what I got a lot of down at New World, which is really, it's just playing for other people. And that was something that I should have taken advantage of at Curtis. Hal was really great about excerpt class and bass class and having us play for each other. And I was always super nervous playing in excerpt class. I just felt like, I'd prepare so much outside of class and I'd walk in and it just wouldn't go the way that I wanted to go. And I'd get frustrated. And as soon as you start at New World, you're teacherless. You don't really have a teacher. So I started leaning more on my friends and my colleagues down there, like Drew Bandshaff and the other bass players. We started playing for each other more. We started holding mock auditions for each other whenever a list will come up, because you don't have a teacher all the time to rely on. So we ended up playing for each other, and I found myself practicing auditions, practicing mocks, practicing playing for people, practicing performance. And I think that is what really kind of pushed me to being comfortable playing in auditions. I actually yesterday, all yesterday, I sat in on the juries at Peabody with Ira Gold and Jeff Weissner and Paul Johnson. And in the middle of the juries, I went out to lunch with Jeff and Ira. And Ira brought up something that really kind of clicked with me, and I wanted to bring it up today. So Ira said something, because I was explaining the same thing to him, and he said it's sort of like a audition taking to him is like a Venn diagram where one side is private practice, and it's this practice that you do all by yourself, and it's you kind of shedding in the practice room, you're learning the notes, you're practicing the bow technique, and this circle is all by yourself. And then there's this other circle, and this is the playing for people. This is the performance side of things. This is you giving recitals. This is you playing mock auditions. This is you just going out there and laying what you have out and making yourself nervous. And then in the middle is sort of audition taking, and it kind of combines both parts. And you can't just have the private practice part. You can't just have the performance part. You really have to have a combination of both of them in order for the audition taking to become successful. And it was really a matter of me just learning how to deal with the anxiety of playing for people and figuring out a way for me to get comfortable while I'm nervous and being able to play the best that I can. And I think the best way to practice that is for playing for as many people as you possibly can. I was pulling aside bass players and violinists, and by the end of it, I was so comfortable playing for people that I remember going up to conductors that were in New World this week, or they'd be conducting New World. And I used to just come to the conductors and say, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time to break? I just want to run a couple excerpts for you. And that's something that I would never imagine doing while I was at Curtis. But I know people who did do that at Curtis, and those people were very successful. And I just that never really clicked for me. Robin Kesselman is just like in my mind right now, because he used to pull people aside all the time and be like, he'd pull aside flute players and be like, can I play these excerpts for you? I'm taking this audition. And for me, it's just like, oh man, I'd be so nervous doing that. Like, I'm just going to go to the practice room and play by myself. But by the end of end of my time at New World, I was pulling aside everybody and anybody who would listen to me. And I think just getting that practice of performing and practice of playing for people is just figuring out how to calm yourself down really kind of changed the audition taking experience for me.
Well, I remember talking with Matt McDonald, principal of Berlin, and he's talking about how he would played for a group of 4-year-olds once. He would play for literally.
I'll play for anybody. I was playing for my parents. My parents, I mean, they're very supportive and know a ton about the bass world now because of me, but they don't know anything about excerpts or what to listen for in the excerpts. But I'll sit them down and say, I'm going to play this list for you. And I'll kind of give them the list and they'll look at it and just kind of pick out a random excerpt. And they're like, Schoenberg? I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, you pick Schoenberg. I'll play it for you. So yeah, I was playing for anybody who would listen.
Yeah. Well, so like some of these auditions where you started to have some success, like San Francisco and Pittsburgh. I remember back to like, you know, whether I'd advance or not, usually not for me, but like just that feeling of just my confidence being so low and being so shattered, especially something like you're coming all the way out to San Francisco multiple times, then there's a no hire. Like, you know, like how do you pick yourself up and get that confidence back? Do you just spring back after a couple days, or like, how does that work for you?
For me, for whatever reason with me, I've kind of been able to shake off auditions pretty freely. I mean, of course, San Francisco and Pittsburgh were both big disappointments for me because they're both such great orchestras. But I've just been able to kind of move past it really quickly. And I think a lot of people say, you know, oh, I wasted 3 months preparing for this audition, or oh, I wasted this amount of time just working up this list, and then I got cut off after 2 excerpts. And for me, it's like it took me a while to realize this. I'm not saying I've always been like this, but I started to kind of realize that it's all progressive, and the work that you did in that one audition where you didn't advance, you still put in all that work, and those excerpts are going to come back in the next audition, and you're going to be more confident playing those excerpts in the next audition. For me, it was a lot of times excerpts that I've performed. I found that excerpts that I've performed in an orchestra setting, or excerpts that I've performed on stage in an audition, those excerpts for me have kind of become excerpts that I'm extremely comfortable with. And the more that I got to play and the more that I advanced, the more excerpts I got to play on stage in an audition, just those excerpts, the more excerpts got put into that pile of just, I'm comfortable with those excerpts. And it kind of got to the point where I would look at a list and be like, okay, so I've played all of these excerpts in previous auditions. I've worked up all these excerpts. I can go through my old books and kind of find all my old markings. I know exactly what my trouble spots are in each one of these excerpts. And the trouble spots got less and less and less each audition just because I was able to work them so many times. And so for me, it's more a matter of, shaking off the audition. Don't worry too much about the past and keep your head down and focus on the next audition, because there's always going to be another audition. And there always was, even if there are some dry spells for 6 months or so, you still did all that preparation for the last audition. You have a book to prove it, at least for me, I always start my auditions with a clean practice book. While I was at Curtis, we had excerpt class with Hal, and I wrote literally every fingering, every bowing, every shift, every dynamic, and I'd circle stuff, and it was bowings on top of fingerings on top of bowings, and it was just, my pages were a mess and in pieces. Literally now they're just like they're shredded. But I started making new books for each audition. So San Francisco, my first audition, I had a clean practice part, and I went through and I marked all these things in that I found that I needed. Like I had to write in these 2 up-ups, otherwise I forget to do 2 up-ups, or I had to circle this note to know to go to that note in the phrase. And then the more auditions I took, so by the time San Francisco came around again, I found that, once again, a clean practice book, but I had less markings in it. And I found that I've internalized a lot of these markings. I don't need to circle this piano dynamic now, because I know that I know to drop there now. I know my bowings kind of internally. And so for me, it was a progress that I didn't really see at the time, until I kind of hit this point where I was playing Baltimore almost out of a clean book, just hardly any markings at all. And I was like, wow, so I do know these excerpts. All these past auditions have added up, leading towards, this audition.
Well, I love that. You're the first person I've ever talked with that has like described exactly that in terms of the practice books. And that seems like such a healthy way to start with a clean slate in terms of markings. Like I remember a colleague, their parts, it looked like the writings of an insane person, right? Because it was like, the page was black with pencil markings, and then there were like red markings on that and blue markings. And it gave me this feeling of anxiety, just like looking at, it's like this incredibly complex equation, just like that simplicity of like having and just putting in what you need for that particular point on your audition continuum. That's great.
Well, when I was at Curtis, I found that I really needed all of those little nitpicky details. Mm-hmm. And the more I found that, and that's why I started using clean parts, is that the more nitpicky details I have on the page, the less I'm focusing on the overall musicality of the line and of the excerpt, and the less markings that I had, the more I could focus on, and the more that I kind of internalized those little nitpicky markings and the ways the excerpt goes, the more I was able to focus on the musicality of it instead of the small little details.
Man, well, congratulations on the Baltimore job. And I think that's awesome. I can't wait to see what you keep on doing. It's cool that you're already going in and offering up some perspective at Peabody. I'm sure they appreciate that. And yeah,
I was super thankful to be asked to go do that. It was pretty surprising for me. And it was exciting to be able to sit in on the juries. And I just, took some notes for people during the juries. And it was fun.
Well, I like to end with just one question, and I'd love to have you back for another round 2, at some point. And you're still a relatively young guy, so I don't know, but like go back to like high school age Tim or 18-year-old Tim or something, and like now having won a job, gone through New World and everything, like what advice might you give young Tim?
Trying to see what 18-year-old Tim would listen to, or listen to like
that's the great, right?
Because I'm trying to think back to when I was 18. I was studying with Ranaan. I was just starting to take auditions, and I was still very confident, I think, at 18 in my playing. And that's why I think my college auditions went so well. Ranaan really set me up for a lot of success. He was my high school teacher, and my college auditions went really well, and. But as soon as I kind of started at Curtis, I felt that I was really far behind. And when I joined Curtis, I hadn't played an excerpt at all. Like I had never played an excerpt. I was playing solos with Ranaan. I was playing Bottesini and I was playing Bach. And it helped me a lot in my playing and my musicality. And I think it was a lot of focus on my right hand with Ranaan. Just a lot of that's your sound. That's you. The left hand technique will come, but the right hand is how you'll be heard. And so I still had that confidence going into my audition, but as soon as I joined Curtis and realized like, oh man, these people are playing full audition lists. And I remember going in to sit in on a mock audition, and I didn't know any of the excerpts. I felt useless. I was just kind of sitting there, and they were like, what'd you think of Beethoven 9? And I was like, oh, well, I've never heard that before. And it sounded good. And they're like, do you have any comments? Do you have any spots that stuck out? And I was like, oh, well, I don't have the music. I don't know how it goes. And I didn't know the recitative. I didn't know what the recitatives were when I joined Curtis. I remember going to a practice room, and Blake Hinson was working on the recitatives, and I asked him where the actual parts were, because I was holding the long tones in between. I had no idea. And so that was kind of 18-year-old Tim at the time. I was looking forward to playing solos, but I felt really far behind on excerpts, and I think I got a little self-conscious playing in class because of that, because I felt behind. So for me, if I were to look back and say something to 18-year-old Tim, it would be, don't be afraid to play for people. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there and get that experience. People are your friends and colleagues, and your teachers are there to help you, and they're not expecting you to come in and play everything perfect. They're expecting you to work hard and then kind of lay it out there, and they'll help you along the way. But I think if I would have gotten started a little sooner playing for people and not being self-conscious about my lack of knowledge of excerpts, I think I could have progressed a little bit faster than I did. But I think discovering the process out along the way on my own was really great.
Yeah, and what a great teacher to have in high school, Ranaan.
Ranaan's he's a great guy.
And also just that focus on the right hand. That reminds me of a Larry Hurst line he liked to use, which is like the average college freshman walks in two years behind in their right hand than in their left hand, and it's so much easier to focus on the left hand in a lot of ways because of the objectivity, right?
Yeah, it's the animal of the instrument. The bass is there's so many shifting, and people now, especially with all the thumb fingerings. I was watching, like I said at Peabody yesterday, seeing all the people play in the juries. The left hand technique is remarkable. And then one of them at the end, I kind of had to summarize the day. And one of the things I mentioned was right hand. Like, don't forget, that's your sound. That is how people will first hear you. And I think that's also a big part of audition taking, is really figuring out what your sound is and figuring out how to really pull a big sound and a loud sound, and also be able to play quiet and delicate. And there's all these different nuances that your left hand doesn't really do. I mean, the fancy thumb fingerings are useful, but at the same time, they're not going to be heard like the right hand will be heard, especially behind a screen. No one's going to know if you're playing. I mean, I have some hilarious fingerings. My Hinastera fingering for the first entire line is basically all ones. I do 1, 1, 1, 1. And nobody would know, because I hide it, and I use vibrato on every note, but I hide it with my right hand, and I make it sound pretty. So that was a big Edgar Meyer thing while I was at Curtis. I would ask him for fingerings, and he'd say, whatever you want, whatever feels good for you. I like using 1 here. And I'm like, oh, you go 1, 1? You can do that? And he's like, yeah, you can do whatever you want, as long as it sounds good.
Thank you, Tim. So great to chat with you. It was such a fun conversation. I can't wait to see what you continue to do as you move forward in your career. And again, if you want to follow along with this series on auditioning, contrabassconversations.com/auditioning will take you to every episode we've done on the topic. And if this is your first episode, you can get these delivered to you each and every day. Well, not each and every day. Each day I put them out. I don't put one out every day. But you can subscribe to the podcast. You can use a variety of methods to do that. If you don't know what that means, and some of you don't, you can go and get our free app for Android, for iOS, for Kindle even. And contrabassconversations.com/app will get you there. And if you are interested in exploring the topic of auditioning even more, check out my book, Winning the Audition, which is a synthesis of audition techniques and strategies from many past podcast guests. You can go to winningtheaudition.net, and that's available as an ebook, it's available as a print book, and it's available as an audiobook. So thanks again for following along. This is one of several interview episodes about the topic of auditioning this week, and I'm glad you're here. So thankful that you're listening along with this, and stay tuned for more Life on the Low End of the Spectrum.